Welcome to Season 3 of Under the Sisterhood, Women Making the World Healthier. We'll be featuring a podcast every Friday through the end of the year. Our conversations will focus on many different aspects of health and wellness. We'll examine women's health, general health, menopause, sexual health, and reproductive health, as well as we'll dive into wellness. This is a podcast to celebrate women and all that they do in our world. I'm Elizabeth Elfenbein. Let's get under the hood. Today, we're getting under the hood of Sherri Snelling, a sister, daughter, friend, women's advocate, corporate gerontologist, authorpreneur, and founder and CEO of Caregiving Club, a strategic consulting and education content creation firm with an expertise in caregiver wellness, well-home design, and brain health. She is the host of the podcast Caregiving Club On Air, producer and host of the unscripted TV show Handle with Care, and author of A Cast of Caregivers, Celebrity Stories to Help You Prepare to Care from 2013. Her new book, Me Time Monday, the weekly wellness plan to find balance and joy for a busy life, is coming out this month, August 22nd, and it explores the neuroscience behind life balance based on Snelling's popular educational workshop and webinars, Me Time Monday, for employee resource groups, ERGs, and other organizations. Snelling writes articles for various online news outlets, including PBS Next Avenue, Forbes.com, and USA Today, and serves as an on-air aging wellness expert for TV and radio news. She advises Fortune 1000 companies and startups in the longevity economy on caregiving and wellness programs, as well as on well home and office interior design. She recently built a financial gerontology master's class program to train wealth advisors at one of the top national financial institutions about financial wellness as we age and take on caregiving responsibility. She also created a Caregiver Hub online discount shopping portal for a client that helps 61,000 employers and 100 million employees to find age tech and other products and services to help their older loved ones at home. Everything from virtual travel to fire and fall prevention at home to robotic pets and adaptable fashion. Snelling has served on aging and caregiving advisory committees for the White House, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the National Institute on Aging, Alzheimer's Association, and is currently an advisor to Georgetown University's Graduate School on Health and Aging. She also is a mentor for the Techstars and Melinda Gates Pivotal Ventures Longevity Startup Incubator Program. Snelling has a master's degree in gerontology from USC Leonard Davis School of Gerontology and a master's certification from MIT Sloan School of Management on shaping the jobs of the future, both of which she achieved after age 50. She lives in Newport Beach, California. Welcome, Sherri. Oh my goodness, so many amazing things.
Well,
Wow.
it's so great to be here, Elizabeth, and thank you so much for having me. I know listening to that, I'm like, woo, okay, that's 30 years worth of stuff.
But 30 really important years. I mean, to make a commitment and dedication to serving both caregivers and the aging population is like, I don't know. I don't want to refer to it as God's work, but it's really a gift because that's such an undermet and underserved community. So thank you. And I'm so excited to start the conversation.
Yeah, me too. I'm just happy to be here with you.
Awesome. So this is season 3, which is Women Making the World Healthier. You are doing so much in the, I argue, health and wellness space, but really in the wellness space, serving these communities. I would love for you to start and share with us your journey to how you got to where you are. And it can start however as early as you began this desire to serve this community.
Sure. So if I can encapsulate this, as I said, over my 30 plus year career, what's really interesting, I think, for people listening is that I started out in marketing and branding positions in consumer technology. I worked for companies like Atari and Nintendo doing video game marketing. And then I worked for Canon doing digital cameras. And about 15 years into my career, I made a pivot that I really resisted. I got a call from an HR recruiter who said, listen, there's a health insurer who's looking for, a really crack marketing person. And I think it would be really great for you to talk to them. And I'm like, I know nothing about healthcare. I don't know anything about healthcare. I'm a techie, I'm a consumer electronic video game nut or whatever. Anyway, I went to the interview. I didn't really sell myself. I kept saying I know nothing about healthcare. Lo and behold, they offered me the job. And the recruiter was really great because she said, listen, you probably know as good as anyone else that there's this convergence that's happening now between health and tech. And at that time, it was still in its infancy. And she said, you can really be an asset to this company. And I think it would be really great to have that on your resume. So I wasn't even thinking long term. And once I got in and I got immersed in the programs, and the program I was assigned to was actually a family caregiver benefit that was sold into employers and also embedded in group retiree plans and Medicare Advantage plans. And it was allowing caregivers to call and get free research and referral service, get access to some creation of some legal documents that might be needed, like living wills and power of attorney, and then also get connected to resources in the community. And it really became my passion. So that's kind of the professional side. And then I can take you more into then the evolution of my career now in caregiving. But I want to also point out that there was a personal side to care, if you will, a thread in my life. So when I was in high school, my grandmother had a stroke. And my mom, of course, and my grandpa, who was much older, but they were the primary caregivers. But I was the backup caregiver to give, my grandpa and my mom a respite over the weekend or for a few hours during the evenings to sit with her and be with her. And then in college, my grandpa had cancer. I kind of did the same thing, helping my mom out. And then later in my career, in fact, when I was writing my first book, I was actually caregiving for my dad, who I lost. So the book was done about 10 years ago. And gratefully, he survived long enough so that he saw the book that I was really focused on getting out be published, which I think was an achievement for him as much as for me.
I
And then
know.
I
Oh.
also was a caregiver for my stepdad. My mom took care of my stepdad, but again, I was there, right hand in glove with her to help out. So I've had both the professional side as well as the personal side of caregiving, which I think gives you a unique glimpse into this world and what the needs are.
I can so relate to that, Sherry. But I think what's interesting is that happened well before you offered the job, it sounds like, in the healthcare space. So you had that experience. And I know, personally, I was in the same boat. That's what got me. I was the caregiver to the caregiver, basically. I wasn't the backup caregiver. That's an interesting one. But I was the caregiver to the caregiver in one scenario. I was a caregiver in another, and then long distance caregivers. And I think when you have those personal experiences, it really opens your eyes in ways, it opens your heart. It helps you understand the journey, the challenges associated with it, and also the unmet needs that aren't being cared for, no pun intended. So it really, in some ways, it gives you like this white space to do something, which you've done by creating the caregiving club. So anyway, so I wanted to accentuate that because I think it sounds like what came first, the chicken or the egg. You got to bring, because you got that job, you had already had those experiences, right? So you got to bring that to bear.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
talk about that.
Yeah. Well, so when I was at United Healthcare, so I spent about a decade working. So I started out with a company called Pacific Care. We were acquired by the large United Healthcare, which I think is still the largest international health and wellness company and insurance payer. And as I said, I started out marketing this program, but as I was there, I segued into a role that was really around creating strategic partnerships and really looking for more of those corporate social responsibility programs built around family caregivers. So I was really privileged to be able to do a lot of work and, in fact, a lot of research with the National Alliance for Caregiving. I actually joined their board and became the chairman of their board for a few years. But we put out the very first study on caregiver health risk. So once you become a caregiver, as we all know that those of us who've done it, you're juggling all these balls, and the ball that you're dropping is the one that says me. And so that whole self care and taking care of yourself kind of goes away. and no criticism, because you're just, your time is just sucked up with all of the focus that you have caring for everyone. And so that report and that study was the first of its kind. Now, of course, there's been numerous studies that have been done on this. But back then, back in 2004, there really wasn't a lot of discussion around the health of the caregiver and the state of the caregiver. And so that really became my passion play throughout the rest of my career at United. And then, of course, when I started my own company, Caregiving Club, I wanted to do two things. I wanted to create educational content to help caregivers really understand the journey a little bit better and where the resources were, because it's such a fragmented, ecosystem to navigate. And, often we don't know what we don't know. And then I also wanted to consult with companies to better support caregivers, particularly in the workplace. And that really became my passion. And my kind of focus was on the self-care of the caregiver. It wasn't so much about let's get you all the resources and let's, educate you about Medicare or Medicaid. It was more about how is your balance in life? How's your wellness? And of course, that then has become the theme of everything that I've done with my own company and now with my books.
I love that. And I love, yeah, it's so interesting. When we spoke last, Sherri, I was telling you just I've had so much experience as well with caregivers, having created the Caregivers Speak Up platform. And then when I was at Comcast going back. And so to your point of looking at those self-insurers and big companies with these employers programs, understanding that the employee programs, I think understanding the need that they're not just caregivers for young children, your employees can be caregivers for older, for parents or relatives. And I think the dynamic is by better supporting them. So we created a series called A Day in the Home of the Caregiver, because Comcast is in at the time it was in 85 million homes. And I think that experience, just doing that, creating that and focusing on the self-care side. I mean, we went out and we did documentaries, so we're learning about the challenges of different types of caregivers. But at the end of the day, as we know, if you don't put your own oxygen mask on, you can't care for your loved ones or whoever you're caring for. So I mean, so you've written books. I mean, I really want to delve deep into, I know right now Me Time Monday's coming out, but I want to almost back up a little and talk a little bit about your first book and then how
Sure.
you soldiered on, because you've accomplished so much and I don't want to circumvent that, if that's
Well,
okay.
thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. So, as a writer, being somebody who's in marketing, you do a lot of writing. Well, of course, all my writing was for the companies I work for. When I started my company, I got to decide what I wanted to write about. And so I started writing for some different outlets. In fact, Joni Evans, who have her own imprint at Random House, and she is one of the icons in publishing in New York City. She actually gave me my first writing job when she started Wow Wow, which was an online blog that she and Candace Bergen and Leslie Schultz and some other, people had started. And so anyway, so that was really exciting to be able to kind of write what I wanted to be writing about. And from there, of course, my first book, what I saw happening is that a lot of caregivers were certainly expressing the need for, how do I find that balance? I just have no time. And then also I feel all alone. And so when I heard that over and over again, the kind of outline for my book came together. And what I wanted to show people is that caregiving is a role that we're all going to play in some way in our lives. Former First Lady Rosalind Carter said it best. You either have been a caregiver, are a caregiver, will be a caregiver, or someone will care for you. And so that kind of became a theme. And what I did is I interviewed celebrities. Now, no, they weren't Julia Roberts and Tom Cruise, but I had Joan London, who, of course, was the host of Good Morning America. I had Holly Robinson Peete, who has done so much fantastic work. I had Jill Eikenberry and Michael Tucker. I had Alan Osmond and his son David Osmond. And what I did is I took all the different roles of caregiving. So caregiving for an older parent, caregiving for a special child, which Holly Robinson Peete, by the way, did both. She cared for her older father who had Parkinson's, And then she also had twins, and one of her twins had autism. So I told her story and had, great interview and insights from her. So what I did in that is said, listen, all of us, even these people that we see who have the money to pay for help, they still go on that emotional roller coaster of caregiving. They still have to navigate this, wild forest of finding their way through all the healthcare system and all that. And then in the middle of the book, I kind of did the what to expect when you're caregiving, which is I took all the different things that you need to think about. You're going to keep your loved one at home, or are you going to think about senior living or memory care? What is Medicare and Medicaid going to pay for? How do you think about senior driving, and should mom or dad still be driving? How do you have those conversations? And then the last section of the book was about self-care. And so that was where the Me Time Monday program was formulated. It was a chapter in that last section, and then ultimately segued into a workshop, as you mentioned, and then now my new book. But that was really the focus of the first book. And I called it A Cast of Caregivers because of the celebrity angle, but also because we're all in this play of caregiving together. We're all the cast of caregivers.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I love that. And it makes so much sense to have that now Me Time Monday, hearing the way it's evolved. And the fact that self-care was the last chapter of your book. So
Mhm.
now it sounds like, and I don't know the time difference between so that was in 2013. So it's what, 10 years?
Yeah, 10 years. It's been 10 years.
Well, no, no, no. I'm highlighting that to say what I think is interesting about it. Don't, because I could see your face. No, actually feel good about it, because it sounds like you've moved on into a real self-care, the wellness space, which really focuses on helping the caregiver find that equanimity, that balance, that peace, so that they can show up for their loved ones or whoever they're caring for. So I think it's really remarkable. So why don't you share, if you would, your Me Time Monday? Like, so it came about at the end of the first book, your celebrity,
Right.
book, but like from a title, all of that, from the programming you created, like sort of what was that moment that Me Time Monday made sense to you?
Yeah, so, it was interesting because I was seeing, some things on social media when I was writing the first book over 10 years ago, and it was like, Wisdom Wednesday, and, there were kind of these catchy phrases, and I had talked about me time for caregivers. How do you find just those few moments that are just for you? And I thought, "Oh, well, it'd be cool is to make a Me Time Monday movement and, kind of as a catchphrase, and then make it something that caregivers could think about every week." So, we all have New Year's resolutions that we normally abandon by February. And by April, almost everybody has dropped their New Year's resolution. And I didn't want it to be like that. I didn't want it to be, okay, I've got this goal of this. I wanted it to be more about a weekly cadence, finding just small moments. And so what was interesting is I was doing these small videos that showcased on YouTube, okay, here's how you can find a Me Time Monday moment. And I got contacted by an organization called the Healthy Mondays campaign. And they are the group, the nonprofit out in New York that actually does the meatless Mondays, the smokeless Mondays, and a lot of different public health initiatives and campaigns that use Monday as, again, your reset point and your checking in with yourself. And so I collaborated with them on a program called Caregiver Monday, which included my Me Time Monday videos along with some other things, social media and things like that. And I did that for a few years. And then Me Time Monday became this workshop because, again, I recognized that caregivers really needed some guidance on, okay, yes, I do know I should care for myself. I, need to find some self-care time, but how do I do that? It's like, I don't even have time to take a shower. How do I find me time? And so I really started studying more about behavioral science and looking at little things like habit stacking. And for the audience, if you haven't heard of habit stacking, there's great books by BJ Fogg out of Stanford, and the Atomic Habits book, which I think has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over a year. But it's all about taking a habit you already have. So let's say I did this myself, brushing your teeth. Okay, that's something you don't even think about. It's automatic. You get up every day, you brush your teeth. I was not getting enough stretching in when my gym closed, and this was just prior to the pandemic. And yet you could think to yourself, well, yeah, why couldn't you find a few minutes during the day? Well, I couldn't. It was just not embedded in my routines. So what I did is I habit stacked. Every morning when I brush my teeth, I'd throw my leg up on the counter and I'd stretch on one side, and then, the next cycle of the toothbrush, I'd stretch on the other side. And it really felt good. It started my day with me thinking, okay, you know what? I did a little something for me. I did something that was good for me. And now I can kind of get on with it. And so just those tiny moments that we can find that kind of give us that boost of dopamine, which is the reward hormone, and making us feel like, okay, I've already accomplished something. Because that's the other thing. A lot of times when we're caregiving, we aren't in control of cancer or Alzheimer's or heart disease, and it can be defeating because as the caregiver, we want to solve our loved ones' problems, and with certain diseases, we can't. And so you wake up and sometimes it feels like this war that you're battling that you won't win. It can be very defeating. And so emotionally and psychologically, we have to find ways to take the control back where we can and boost those feel good hormones. And I talk about four hormones against the apocalypse, but boost those feel good hormones to again bring us back into balance over what we're really challenged with in our caregiving lives.
I love that. And I love that. I love now understanding the connection with the Me Time Monday. It's like Motivation Monday was a hashtag that was created
Right.
like Wisdom Wednesday. And I think what's interesting about it, back to your comment about habit stacking and really thinking about building these routines, these me times into your life. So maybe you don't call it routines. Like, interestingly, I never would have thought it, but I wake up, I do the same thing. I make I do breathing exercises, and I make the bed, then I brush my teeth, and then I go and I meditate. Like, but they aren't necessarily stacked. Sometimes I'll stretch my calves when I'm brushing my teeth.
Right.
But I think what's interesting is when you look at it from the perspective of me time, this is another way to think of it from an audience perspective. When you think of taking those little things as me times versus thinking of them as just as a routine, something you have to do, there's something, I don't know, it's like kind of like a topping on it's like icing on the cake. It's just something sweet about that. And I don't mean to,
Right.
I just think it's a very interesting way to reframe the conversation around routines, and I
Well, and
love.
I also think, yeah, and I also think that me time, people have different definitions of it. Me time doesn't always mean that it's a solo activity. Your me time could be joining a friend for coffee or having a telephone conversation with somebody you haven't talked to in a long time. I think also that just as a society, we have a tendency to want to take big bites. It's not going to mean anything unless I work out for 45 minutes. It's not going to mean anything unless I can get away for a whole 2.5 hours to go see a movie. Um, and sometimes you can find that time, but and what I love about the book I'm now coming out with is that so much of the science and the surveys and studies are showing us it's 7 to maybe 15 minutes. It's all you need just to get that boost and just to have it be healthful and beneficial for your well-being. So we need to look at tiny things, not big things, because the big things will keep us from doing it because we don't have the time, to do all that. But if we have just a couple minutes or, a couple minutes here or there, then it becomes, I think, a lot easier to do. And then we kind of fuel that feel good feeling of keeping it going. And the Monday is your reset and reward. You look back over the week and you say, hey, did I get my me time? All right. Maybe I get a bite of that sprinkles cupcake today, or, whatever it is that you want to reward yourself with. Or you say, you know what? My plans just fell apart. I had no me time. Okay. I am not going to let it go this week. I have another week to do this. I'm going to find a few minutes. And that's what I love. You got 52 Mondays in the calendar. So you never feel defeated because you're going to probably be able to, accomplish something in most of those Mondays. But don't beat yourself up if you've got we all have bad weeks, right? Where it doesn't happen. And I think that's the thing that I see in the wellness marketing right now about self-care. It can be very, again, self-defeating because it's about a perfection. And me time is really, and self care is about progress. It's not about perfection. And it's about personalizing it for us, not being told what to do, but, learning about ourselves and our bodies and our brains and figuring out what works best for us. And one of the things I will say about writing my second book is, as you mentioned, I went back and got my master's in gerontology after the age of 50. So, yeah, I know, yay, lifelong learning.
Amazing. Well,
Um,
thank you.
which is, by the way, is one of my 7 elements of wellness. It's intellectual wellness, right? But what I did is I took what we study in gerontology is biology, psychology, and sociology, which of course is our social connections. We take those 3 spheres and we look for equilibrium between those 3. And we know if we can achieve equilibrium, where all 3 of those areas are balanced, we have the optimal situation for better health, longer lives, happier lives. It's hard though, right? That balance is challenging. What I did in the book is I took those 3 biopsychosocial and I broke them down into 7 elements. So you have your physical, you have your emotional, you have your social, you have your intellectual, you have your environmental, you have your financial, and you have your spiritual. And again, that might seem like a lot. Like, wow, I've got to, find something in each of those areas. Well, you could pick an area a week. You could say, this week's going to be my spiritual wellness week. And I'm going to have a line of gratitude that I say every day or whatever it is. But, again, small things, but the 7 elements of life really encompass balance, because sometimes people define wellness as, well, at working out and I'm got a pretty nutritious diet going and I meditate every once in a while, which is great. That's wonderful. But that doesn't speak to your social fitness and your social wellness. It doesn't speak to your financial wellness. It doesn't maybe speak to your spiritual wellness. So you can be really good in certain areas and then have some deficits in other areas. And that's why we feel our lives are out of balance. And there was really great research I came across. It was actually from Native American culture. The Hopi tribe actually has a word called Kuwanakwatsi. Now, what's interesting is this was a documentary that I saw when I was back in undergrad at USC, getting my journalism and poli-sci degree way many decades ago. And I saw this documentary and it really stuck with me. And what it means is a life out of balance. And the whole premise is the more technology we have in our lives, so we have to use technology, let's face it, right? So much of our lives are based around technology. You have to bring more nature into your life to really have balance. And that's brain health, that's neuroscience. And that was what I became super passionate about when I got my master's and certainly in writing this second book.
I love that. You just struck a chord with me personally because I don't know about you. I went through a period. I was so attached to my phone, my device in my career. And when I left my career 5 years ago to sort of pursue getting into communities and working with startups, I'm still on my phone quite a bit, but I feel like I'm less, like my thumbs, by the way, don't have any pain in them, and I'm out in nature. And so I think what you're doing is really, I think that's something, and I think it'll be really helpful. Hopefully a lot of caregivers, actually it's relatable for anybody to take a look at, particularly this area as it relates to technology versus nature or nature and the relationship with it too. So I'll be very curious. I can't wait for your book to come out. I can't wait to read it. But that's fascinating to me because I think that we are a society today that we're just going. And in fact, I was just writing about this in my journal this morning about the nature of getting off a gerbil mill, like a gerbil mill of over 30 years that we're just going. And we don't stop, we don't pause, we don't reflect until something happens, typically, until there's an inflection point, and I think David Brooks, his book, The Second Mountain, speaks to that. You get to the top of the mountain in whatever capacity and think something happens. And then suddenly you're on your journey on the second mountain, which is the discovery. And I think that's where, if I use the way you're looking at it, is bringing nature into that. And so I think that it's interesting, your thesis, and it'll be interesting to read your book on where nature takes you and how it sort of restores your wellness. So I personally love that because that's where I am. I'm guessing you are.
Right?
Well, I don't think you can write about it and not live it. So I want to ask you about that. So, I mean, you're
Sure.
writing about these really important subjects. You've been a caregiver, you've been a caregiver to a caregiver, you've been the backup caregiver, you've been the caregiver. And now you're on this sort of wellness, it almost has kind of a spiritual connotation to it. Are you living that as you write it? Is it something that's coming from your heart, that something happened? Or is it just you see that it's a need because you've studied it, you did your math? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, or is it both?
Yeah. I think it's a bit of both. I certainly, the book is not necessarily, a lot of self-help books are written as, I have this issue or problem and here's my solution and you do this and it'll work for you. I don't necessarily believe that. I believe that we all have to personalize our health and wellness. Now, the way I look at wellness is not as prescriptive, but is instructive. And maybe that's the teacher in me. I think I have this little teacher DNA inside. But what was happening is, despite the fact I was pursuing my passion with my business and I was doing all these things and really, having some success, I didn't feel like my life was in balance. And so I really started studying that. And then when I got my master's, it just crystallized for me because I was learning so much about the science. And I want to share with your audience something that really hit me when I got my master's. So, and I write about this in the book to kind of set up this whole brain health and neuroscience and nature motif. If I take you back to 2 to 3 million years ago, when we were out on the African savanna, and what we saw blue skies. We had fresh air. We could smell the air and it would tell us what the weather was going to be. Is it going to rain? Is it going to be real sunny? We saw a mosaic of trees. So then we knew, okay, I can get some shelter from some shade, but also I can protect myself if there's a predator, I can crawl up into that tree and protect myself. And then you saw grasslands and green and floral. And what this told the brain is, okay, this is a good space because there's a water source and there's a food source here. And so those wide open spaces, the blue air, the freshness of smelling things, and our five senses, right? It's a multi-sensory experience. That is what soothes and calms our brains. And we still have something in our brain that we call in science the ancient brain. It has to do with the brain stem and then the amygdala, which is where a lot of emotions like fear and anger are housed, and the hippocampus, which is where a lot of our memories are housed. And so, what we don't know or don't understand in brain health is that now we have a modern brain on top of that as we've evolved. And that's our analytical brain, decision making, rationality, language. But the ancient brain still exists. And one of the reasons why we feel so stressed and so overwhelmed and out of balance is because we're not feeding the ancient brain. And this is where nature comes in. So if you were to do something simple, such as in the very beginning of your day, get outside for 5 minutes, see hopefully sunshine. I know we have different seasons, so there may be some days with no sunshine, but even if it's a little cloudy, the sun is still there, but you smell the air, you see some of the greenery hopefully in your environment. You walk around, you feel things, maybe touch a flower or whatever happens to be in your garden. Also, we're either taking a shower, a bath, or at least washing our face. Now we have blue wellness. We have the water element that is giving us that fresh, revived sense. And if you just do those two things, you're going to start your day with this nature infusion into your senses that really is amazing because it really helps you balance your day because now you're going to come inside. We spend 95% of our days inside, not outside, and you're going to get immersed in all this technology. So take little breaks if you can during the day and just stare out of a window if you can onto something of nature. Maybe light a candle that has a nature scent. If it's during the winter, have your fire on so you can just look at the fire and feel the warmth. The five senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, are really, really important to brain health and to bringing about calm. And I think it's one of the things we overlook because it's too simplified. We don't think about it. It's like, no, I've got to meditate or do something else. Actually, meditation comes about organically when you spend some time just kind of looking at nature, spending time in nature. And again, it's literally like 5 or 7 minutes a day and you're set, you're good.
Again, you're speaking my language. I love it. Thank you, by the way, for sharing earlier that you had that moment that you felt that you were out of balance, because I think it's really important. Often when we have these ideas, they come from a personal experience. I think that's an awesome trigger. But more importantly, this research that you've done, Sherri, to share, with the world, your perspective, I would never have thought of the ancient mind. I would never have gone back and thought of that. I am a nature lover. I do everything to get my couple of hours a day in nature because it makes me happy. I feel grounded. I feel
Right.
it just grounds me. And but I love the way you're explaining it, because I think all of us as humans understanding the importance of this and the benefits. And back to your earlier comment about the just moments like Me Time Mondays, these moments, it's like these micro moments. If you can do those micro moments in nature, like
Yes.
just the benefits are tremendous. So I just think that's awesome. So as your book's coming out on the 22nd, and as I said, I can't wait to get it and read it. What are your hopes now? So you're putting this out in terms of helping people with wellness, but what are what's your, I don't know, your dreams in terms of where this can go for you?
Sure. Well, part of my mission with the book is I really wanted, again, I wanted it to be instructive, not prescriptive necessarily, but I wanted to give people the tools and also a better understanding about our brains. We know a lot about our bodies. We know how to, keep ourselves fit from the neck down, but not necessarily from the neck up. And I wanted to give the reader some ideas about little things that you can do, understanding this ancient brain. Also, understanding that, that was 2 to 3 million years ago, that the ancient brain that we had then still exists. The other thing we need to understand about brain health is that it's just a little over 100 years that we invented electricity. And that brought us artificial light. It brought us washing machines and dishwashers and TVs and radios and now streaming and smartphones and everything else, and we have all this technology in our life, and yet we're asking our bodies and brains to adapt in just 100 years. The body doesn't adapt that fast, so we have to be kind. We have to think about, again, okay, I need this technology, I have to use it in my life, but I need to go back to that ancient brain and I need to soothe it and I need to give it the nature. So I wanted to help people really understand how the brain works, what's really going on when you feel anxiety or depression or stress, and how to manage those. And then give you some of these techniques like a Me Time Monday science, because there is science, by the way, behind Monday starts and resets. Johns Hopkins did some really wonderful research showing that you're more successful using Monday as your day to kind of start something new and keep it going every Monday. So I wanted to give all those techniques, and I'm hopeful it will take off because, again, when I was out of balance, I was feeling bad because, I'm not the skinniest girl on the block. And sometimes my nutrition wasn't so great. I feel like I was just failing. And that's the bad side of the marketing messages that are out there around wellness right now. We're looking for this perfection rather than just this process through life that's going to become a lifestyle where we're kind to ourselves and we're kind to our brains, and we have balance in other areas beyond just looking great or eating great. Right. And so I think I really can live that and tell people, when you have some of these other 7 elements in balance, it feels really good. So,
Thank you. Thank you. That's actually really good. What was coming to me as you were saying it is it's not about looking whatever, it's about the feeling. It's about
yeah.
the end benefit. It's what you feel when you do these things and take the me time. And I love the Monday starts. I personally have always loved Monday starts, but I love the me time now. I'm going to think about that a lot as I go about my Mondays, because I think it is a great time to reset. It's interesting, Sherri, like in my career, I have done quite a bit of work on behavior modification on the communications, the creative side, marketing. So I understand this really, really clearly, but I think what you've done, so I hear you talking about setting these routines as you reframe the conversation. So by
Mhm.
not making it feel you're using the word perfection. I'm thinking onerous. If you think it's too big, it's just like when you said earlier, you said, we get into the new year, we start off with these big goals, and by February, we haven't kept our goals, and by April, we're done. And so I think by doing these, let's say incremental, because that makes it feel small, by taking these moments and focusing it, because there's also more joy when it's moments. You can just
Yes.
sort of savor it, if you will, like gratitudes in a way, right?
Right. Well, and I love that you just used the word joy, because that's one thing I wanted to touch on. And, a lot of as you just said, we feel like we're failing if we don't meet these big goals. That's why these little, what I call them, are micro flows or baby steps. Those give you that sense of you've accomplished something, even if it's tiny. And that's a positivity psychology that's really, really important for achieving happiness in life. And I know that happiness, we've got so many books and studies and everything around happiness. And yet, we are, as a globe, global society, we are less happy than we have been in the past decades. And I think part of it is that we don't have a lot of control over a lot of things, but we do have control over our own happiness, because happiness are choices. And so one of the things I talk about in the book is, we chase after certain economies, and there's ups and downs in our economy. There's the longevity economy we talked about, which is people over 50 who have a certain wealth, power, and influence. There's the care economy that the World Economic Forum talks about, which is going to be one of the biggest economies going forward, which is all the caregiving and health and wellness needs that we're going to have as people live longer. What I call my book is part of the joy economy. And what that means
Yeah.
is, how do you invest and practice and create these things that create the joy economy for you? How do you find that happiness? And we are in control. We can't control the financial economy we're in. We can't control disease. We can't control the actions of other people, but we can control the happiness factor. And I think that's what I want to give people, is a sense of control back over your life. Balance and control is what I'm looking for.
I love that. There's a lot to unpack there. There's so much juice in this conversation. I don't even know where to go, Sherri. It's unbelievable when I think about what you've done. And like it's even in the way, because I don't know how your book's going to unfold. You're hitting on so many very interesting topics. Do you bring up those different economies as well, from the care economy to the joy economy?
Yeah. So I tend to have something around the number 3 and 7. So in my first book, I had 3 sections. Of course, in the second book, I also have 3 sections. So part one is setting up this whole nature and neuroscience, living longer, more caregivers. When we think about the workplace, 1 in 3 employees is caregiving for someone who is either a child all the way up through older care and caring for grandparents or older parents. 1 in 6 is caring for someone over 50. That's a pretty good percentage of our workplace. So we're needing to rethink those social contracts at work, right? So I set all of that up, and I talk about this joy economy concept in part one. Part two is all about, okay, what's Me Time Monday? What's the science of Mondays? What's the science of positive psychology and rewarding yourself and keeping with it? And what are those techniques around habit stacking and microflows and all that? And then the whole third part is breaking down my 7 elements: the physical, emotional, social, etc. And I weave in also stories. There's stories. In the intellectual section, interestingly enough, I have a story about Tom Brady, and it's a story about exercising your brain. And I have another story, about the skeletons that were found right outside of Verona, Italy. They were from 6,000 years ago, and it was a male and female skeleton that were embraced in a loving embrace, like they were hugging with their foreheads together. And the anthropologists and archaeologists who found them called them Romeo and Juliet. And I think what that shows us is that from our most ancient beginnings and thousands of years, our social connections are having someone who has our back, having love, having a hug. Those are essential to thriving in life. And so I just tell little stories like that to kind of set up those sections. And then I talk about the science of sleep science, of lifelong learning, of daydreaming, which, by the way, is a really great technique. Um, to kind of get you out of the challenges and the stressors of the day, is just to take a few minutes and just daydream, and you let your mind free wander. And the daydream can't be ruminating. It can't be taking your anxieties and focusing on those. It has to be something like, you're a rock star and there's 90,000 people in the arena listening to you, or you just won an Oscar and you're going to give your speech, or, you're flying to the moon as the first woman in space or whatever. Daydream actually helps us be creative in solving solutions in the challenges in life. So I talk a little bit about that. So I give people these free things that they can think about that might work for them, and just taking a few minutes a day, and using, again, the multisensory inputs. Music is amazing in terms of not just calming ourselves and helping ourselves maybe get to sleep. I talk about, for sleep science, we want less blue light, which is all the blue light emission coming from our TVs and digital devices. You want to shut all of that down 2 to 3 hours before you even get into bed, because there's a latency period with blue light emission in our brain, where a blue light will tell your body to stay awake for the next 2 to 3 hours. So if you're, kind of doom scrolling a few minutes before bed, your body isn't really going to go to sleep for another 2 to 4 hours, even though you've shut your eyes and you're in bed. And this is where we get a lot of insomnia and we see a lot of issues with sleep. So, lessen the blue light and then increase the pink noise. And pink noise is, we have sonic hues of sound vibrations and they're assigned a color. Pink noise is the one that's associated with nature sounds. And it is prescribed by pediatricians to get infants to sleep. It's prescribed by geriatricians to help older people with insomnia and everybody in between. So, just understanding, again, how the brain works and how some of these things can help. I also talk about, for instance, this blue light. You don't want to have night lights that are blue light. You want to have red or orange amber lights. So you can still see at night if you have to get up and go to the bathroom, but the amber orange light is dusk and it tells the brain, okay, yeah, you're still in that sleep mode. You're okay. So again, it all goes back to understanding brain health and then what's going to help the health habits that we have right now.
I love that. I think that's so helpful. And it's just, it's great. I mean, I think that we live in a time, and I think we talked about this in our last conversation, that wellness is sort of, it's ubiquitous, right? But it's how wellness is being talked about, how it's being shared. And I think that it sounds like Me Time Monday is going to be an excellent way to really teach people how to think differently about wellness as it relates to them.
Right.
Right. I'm
Well, one
excited.
other thing I'll just add to Elizabeth, and I think you and I talked about this when we were talking about doing this interview, is the environmental wellness.
Mm,
One of the things we overlook is how important our environments are to our wellness factor, right? Do you have green plants in your home? Do you have those multisensory inputs? Do you have nature elements, where you can see natural, things like wood, fire, wind, water, those types of things? Those are really important. It's called biophilic design. It's my new passion. And it's important in both our home environments, but also our work environments. And so, I'm working with employers now to take a look at how their environments are and how can we create more of those kind of nature infused environments that help people feel less stressed at work.
oh, I love that. I think that could be a it'll be curious to see the impact of that over time and in companies, because we are living in such a different time with sort of the hybrid workforce. But I think that could be something that, if companies did invest in their spaces like that, say like a Google, like these large companies where they go in and they create that environment so people will want to be at work because the work
Right.
environment's so nice. So I think that's an awesome way to think about it. And I know personally, like, home environment has always been so meaningful to me, and not like necessarily in a feng shui way, but incorporating all the things as you were suggesting, your senses, the experience and feeling. For me, like creating an environment that's inspired. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be big, but it has to be a space that you can feel comfortable in and safe in. But I love the infusing nature, even if it's outside your window versus like having you know what I mean? So I think that's
Right. And it's also
fantastic.
about using things like color psychology, because certain colors have certain meanings for us, using certain scents in the home, using things like curves, are, again, when we see something sharp and pointy, then our brain immediately goes, ooh, safety, be careful. When we see something curved, it's like it's comfy. You want to get into it. You're okay. You're going to be safe. So it's just those little things that are triggering the brain to see certain things in your home that can be helpful to calm your brain.
I really like that. I think it's fantastic. I love the fact that I feel like this conversation has been you teaching me things that I do intuitively or instinctively.
Yes, I know. You have to applaud yourself. You're already doing all this.
No, but but I love the way this is being discussed and analyzed. And when we think about it, and maybe that's why, I can really appreciate and live in the gratitude space. But I want to, I mean, this has been a fascinating conversation. I mean, back to doing what you're doing for caregivers, but like for Me Time Monday is so much more than caregiving. It's about a way of living that helps reset and really give you a sense of balance. And I think obviously when you're caregiving, you're less balanced. So it's very helpful and you might be able to target that group. But I think this could be helpful, particularly in the world we live in today, to everybody and anybody at all ages. So I think, kudos to you. I can't wait to read it. What, like as we're coming to an end, and you have an opportunity, before I ask you the last question, what do you want to share in terms of this beyond what you've talked about in terms of caregiving, balance? Is there anything overarching that you want to leave with before we get into the last question?
Right. I think it's just that I want people, and some people did it during the pandemic because we were forced to, but I want people to take a pause and to really be thoughtful about your life and breathe. We run at such a fast pace and we are multitaskers extraordinaire and we do so many different things. And, speaking specifically to caregivers, you're juggling all these balls. It is really important to just take a pause and almost reflect and almost do an audit of your life and think about what's missing, what's going to comfort you. Because again, we know we're better caregivers when we are taking care of ourselves. And what I talk about in the book is something new that I was a little resistant to when it first started evolving. And I will say it kind of started with a Harvard study that came out in 2019 called The Caring Company. And what it spoke to is that the definition of caregivers in the workplace was anyone caring for a loved one. Now, that included parents of young children, and it also included, of course, caregivers of older parents or grandparents. I was a little bit like, wait a minute, you can't, hijack our term. We're trying to get caregivers to self-identify. And then I realized, you know what? This actually makes a lot of sense. And so in the book, I call it Gen C, which stands for Generation Caregiver. And there's this continuum in our life. We start our lives being cared for. We end our lives being cared for. And in between, we create relationships where we might then be caring for others, mutual care, or sometimes, we're providing the care. But the one constant, the one through line throughout life is self care. And when we can become masters at self care, then we will become the best caregivers and have the happiest, longest, healthiest life because we've achieved that mastery in taking care of ourselves as well as we take care of the other relationships. And so that's across life, no matter what age or stage that you're in.
Wow, thank you. That's brilliant, actually. It's really brilliant. There is one thing I want to pick at, which is I love
Sure.
the notion of generation caregiver. The only problem with that is that if you look at the various generations chronologically, boomers, et cetera, like generation caregiver goes across the continuum of life, as you said, from, you're cared for at the beginning, you go out caring or being cared for. And so I think it's so much bigger than that. It's not one period, it's your whole life. So I think that's very interesting.
Yes. And thank you for saying that because I explain in the book that the way I define generation caregiver is it is ageless. It's more of a what we call in marketing psychographics rather than demographics. And
Okay.
so often we're kind of looking at the demographics, where do you live? What's your socioeconomic status? What's your age? What's your gender? And generation caregiver is ageless. It is geographicless, it's cultureless. It's because everybody fits into this caregiver at some point. And so it really is, you're right. It isn't about that demographic definition. It's the psychographic, it's the needs,
I
it's
like
the
that.
attitudes, Yeah, and what caregivers really need, no matter who they're caring for, what age or where they are.
That's great. That's actually brilliant. And thank you for that explanation. That's really helpful. Sherri, I don't want this conversation to end. I think you're brilliant. I love the work you've
This
done.
has been fun.
Here, honestly, on behalf of caregivers, you're amazing. I have one last question. I think you're going to like this one, which is, you have a platform today with women around the world to give a message to women of all ages, of all backgrounds, caregivers, being cared for, caring for, everything in between. What do you want to say to women around the world?
Well, first of all, I want to applaud women because we have to acknowledge that even though we're seeing a higher percentage of men step into a primary caregiver role, the majority are still women. And we really are the chief medical officers of our families. We're the chief caregiving officers of our families. And we take on so much. Again, we're multitaskers extraordinaire. And that's often something that's, really applauded. But what I want to help women understand is that the nurturing of ourselves is really important as well. Because again, once we fill our souls and feel good and have a little moment of self care, we can then give so many gifts to so many others. And whether it's our workplace, whether it's our children, whether it's our parents or grandparents, whether it's our spouse or partner, or even our friends, we just are able to have more of that because we have that balance. So I think women can do it because we can do anything, right? We've proven that. And so I would say to anyone out there listening, women are really resilient. I think sometimes, we do find that we have some fears and anxieties and maybe depression, but think about your brain health and balance because that'll give you back your control. And with that, we can accomplish anything. So
I just want to give you a big hug. I think you're doing really important work. You've been doing it for years. I'm so glad you left, gaming technology and went into healthcare because your voice and what you have to offer the world, Sherri, is really, really special. And I just want to say
thank
thank
you.
you so much for joining us today on Under the Sisterhood. And I'm so happy to have had this experience. Really honored.
Well, I'm really grateful, Elizabeth, that you reached out. It's so great to talk to you. It's been really fun. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Under the Sisterhood. If you haven't already, please give us a quick rating and review on Apple or Spotify. And make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter so you can hear from more amazing women. This podcast is created and hosted by Under the Sisterhood, LLC, and Elizabeth Elfenbein, produced by Elizabeth Elfenbein and Zach Slaff, and edited by Zach Slaff. The music is by Ayla Schaefer, her song, Rose.